My mom said, "If you're hungry, feed yourself. I'm not paying for you anymore." I just nodded. Weeks later at her birthday, 16 relatives gathered around the table, then went quiet. No food, no setup. She looked at me, pale. I smiled. I thought we were all handling our own now. My mom once told me, right to my face, with my 4-year-old daughter Chloe sitting on my lap, "Jenna, if you're hungry, feed yourself. I'm not paying for you anymore." She said it like she was canceling a subscription, like I was some streaming service she didn't use enough to justify the cost. And you know what I did? I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just nodded, fully. But something in me snapped that day. It wasn't a broken snap. It was more like a woke-up snap, like when your phone dies in the middle of a mindless scroll, and you suddenly notice the world around you is in full color. I looked down at my daughter, and she was looking up at me with those big hazel eyes, and I thought, "All right, Mom, let's play it your way." But before I tell you what happened at her birthday, and oh, trust me, we are getting there, you need to understand how I ended up sitting in my parents' house in Palmer, Ohio, at 26 years old, with a child on my hip and absolutely nothing in my bank account. This story didn't start with that sentence. It started with a man named Kyle. Kyle was beautiful. I hate that I still think that, but he was. Tall, with this easy grin and a way of running his hand through his hair that made my stomach flip. We met at a speedway on a Tuesday night. Yeah, a gas station. Go ahead and judge me. He was in front of me in line, buying a Red Bull and a pack of gum, and he turned around and said my car had a low tire. It didn't. But it got us talking. 3 months later, I was pregnant. And look, I know what some of you are thinking. So reckless. Another statistic. But have you ever met someone who made the whole room feel warmer just by walking into it? That was Kyle. He felt like sunshine after a long Cleveland winter. Until he didn't. When I told him about the baby, he did this thing where he smiled and hugged me, but his arms were stiff. You know that hug? The one that says, "I'm here, but I'm already leaving at the same time." He stuck around for the birth. He held Chloe once, for about 5 minutes. He took a picture for Instagram with the caption, "My whole world." Then, about 5 weeks later, he got a job offer in Pittsburgh. Or at least that's what he called it. He packed a single duffel bag while I was feeding the baby and said he'd call when he got settled. I never saw him again. He blocked me on everything. His mom, a woman named Barb, who always smelled like cigarettes and regret, told me through her screen door that I should move on and let that boy live his life. So there I was. No job, no savings, a newborn who cried constantly, and nowhere to go except back to my parents' house on a street lined with identical vinyl-sided houses. My dad, Frank, he carried my bags in without a word. He just kissed Chloe on the forehead, his calloused factory worker hand so gentle against her skin. My mum, Sharon, stood at the top of the stairs with her arms crossed, her face a mask of disappointment. "This better be temporary, Jenna," she said. It was not temporary. Do you think she let me forget it? Not for a single day, not for a single hour. Every morning Sharon had a comment ready. "You're still here. That baby cries too much. It's giving me a headache. When I was your age, I had my own apartment and a husband. Yes, Mom. When you were my age, rent was $400 a month and gas was $1.50 a gallon. But sure, let's compare. And I tried, okay? I really, really tried. I spent hours on the old desktop computer in the basement, the one that sounded like a jet engine taking off. I applied to jobs constantly. Walmart, Target, the hospital cafeteria at the Cleveland Clinic, a daycare center. Which, by the way, The irony of needing to pay for childcare so you can go to work at a childcare centre. Nobody talks about that enough. It's a trap. But Sharon acted like I was sitting around eating bonbons and watching soap operas all day. Every plate of food she made came with a side of guilt. Every time I used the washing machine, she'd sigh loudly from the other room. There goes my electric bill, up and up. I started washing Chloe's tiny onesies and bibs in the bathroom sink at night, wringing them out by hand and hanging them on the shower rod, just to avoid the lecture. It was easier than facing her. My dad tried to help. Frank is a quiet man. He's worked at the Ford engine plant for 22 years. He comes home smelling like grease and exhaustion. He'd slip me a 20 here and there when my mum wasn't looking. He'd whisper, "For Chloe, don't tell your mother." And I love him for that. But he never once stood up to her. Not once. He'd just sit in his worn-out recliner, the stuffing coming out of one arm, and turn up the volume on the evening news. He'd just pretend the house wasn't on fire around him. You ever love someone and be completely frustrated with them at the exact same time? That was me and my dad, every single day. Now here's where it gets interesting. My mom had this thing about appearances. Sharon could be screaming at me in the kitchen at 6 a.m, calling me every name except the one she gave me. Then an hour later, she'd be on the phone with her sister, my Aunt Carol, saying in this sweet, syrupy voice, "Oh, Jenna and Chloe are doing just fine. We just love having them here. It's such a blessing." I used to stand in the hallway and listen with my mouth open. Who was this woman? Because the version she performed for the family was nothing like the one I lived with every day. And honestly, for a long time, I believed I deserved it. I thought, yeah, I messed up. I got pregnant by a man who disappeared. I came crawling back home with my tail between my legs. Maybe I should just take whatever she gives me and be grateful for a roof over my head. Do you think that's true? Because I thought it was. For a long, long time, I really thought she was right. But then something happened that changed everything. Chloe was about 3.5, and she had started picking up words like a sponge. One afternoon, Sharon was giving me her favorite lecture. "You need to figure your life out, Jenna. You can't live here forever." And Chloe, who was coloring on the floor, looked up at me with her little crayon-stained hands and said, "Mama, figure life out." She just repeated it, with the same sharp, disappointed tone my mother used. And I saw my little girl absorbing all of this bitterness. She was learning that this is how you talk to someone you're supposed to love. And that broke something open in me. I started keeping a journal. It wasn't a sad, dear diary kind of journal. It was more like a war plan. I wrote down every nasty thing Sharon said, not to throw it back in her face one day, but to remind myself, on the days when I felt weak, that this was real and I was not imagining it. I wasn't just being sensitive. I wrote down job leads. I even called Aunt Carol, Sharon's own sister, and asked if she knew of anything. Carol lived about 40 minutes away in Akron, and she was the complete opposite of my mother. She was warm and soft-spoken. She always smelled like cinnamon. She used to tell me, "Honey, everybody falls down. It's the getting up that counts." I held on to that sentence like a life raft. Things with Sharon got worse before they got better. One night, I made Chloe some scrambled eggs. I used my mum's eggs from my mum's fridge. Apparently, this was a criminal offense. Sharon came into the kitchen, saw the empty eggshells in the trash, and just stared at me. "You know those aren't free, right?" I looked at her. I looked at my daughter, who was happily mashing eggs into her mouth. I said very calmly, "I'll replace them tomorrow." She scoffed. "You'll replace a lot of things tomorrow. You've been saying tomorrow for 2 years now, Jenna." That one actually hurt. It cut deep because she wasn't entirely wrong. I had been struggling, but struggling is not the same as lazy, and Sharon never understood the difference. To her, if you weren't succeeding, you weren't trying. There was no middle ground, no room for failure or bad luck. Then came the moment. The one I already told you about. Chloe was 4. We were at the kitchen table. I had just heated up some leftover chicken and rice for our lunch. Again, from the sacred refrigerator. Sharon walked in, leaned against the counter with that familiar judgmental look on her face, and said it. "Jenna, if you're hungry, feed yourself. I'm not paying for you anymore." Chloe looked up from her plate, her little fork frozen in mid-air. I looked at my mum, at her hard eyes and thin lips, and I nodded. I just nodded. But inside, deep inside, I made a decision. And trust me when I say, my mother had no idea what she had just set in motion. Because the thing about pushing someone who has nothing left to lose is that they stop being afraid. And I had just run out of fear. What I did next, honestly, even I didn't see it coming. But it started with a phone call to Aunt Carol and a duffel bag I packed at 2 o'clock in the morning. And what happened at my mother's birthday weeks later? Oh, we'll get there. But you need to hear what happened in between first, because that's the part that changed everything. So there I was, 2 o'clock in the morning, standing in my childhood bedroom with its faded floral wallpaper. I had a duffel bag in one hand and a sleeping 4-year-old in the other. I'm thinking, where exactly do you go when you leave the only roof you've got? Because in movies, people storm out dramatically. The next scene, they're in a cute little apartment with exposed brick and a fire escape. In real life, you're sitting in the dark, Googling, "Can I legally sleep in my car with a child?" and hoping your phone doesn't die before you find an answer. I called Aunt Carol at 2 o'clock in the morning, and bless that woman. She picked up on the second ring like she'd been waiting for my call her whole life. I whispered, trying not to wake my dad in the next room. "Auntie, I need to leave. I have to leave right now." And she didn't ask why. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't lecture me. She just said, "Drive slow, honey. The porch light's on." Have you ever had someone in your life who just gets it without needing the whole long, messy explanation? That was Aunt Carol. She was 61 years old. She'd lived alone since her husband Gerald passed. She had a spare room with a quilt on the bed that smelled like lavender and old love. I carried Chloe to my rusty old Honda Civic. She didn't even stir. That girl could sleep through a tornado. I put our one duffel bag in the trunk and sat behind the wheel for a solid 5 minutes, just breathing. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. And then, and this is the part that surprised even me, I went back inside. I didn't go back to say goodbye. I didn't go back to leave a note. I went to the kitchen. I opened the fridge and I took out every single item I had bought with the little cash Dad had slipped me over the past few weeks. A carton of orange juice, some deli turkey, a pack of string cheese for Chloe, half a gallon of milk. I put it all in a grocery bag and took it with me. Was it petty? Absolutely. 100%. But you know what? When someone tells you they're not feeding you anymore, you take your food and you go. Fair is fair. Now, here's the part I didn't expect. I thought my mum would call by morning. I thought she'd wake up, see my empty room and panic. Maybe even feel a flicker of guilt. You want to know when Sharon first called me? 3 days later. 3 whole days. And it wasn't even a, "Where are you?" or "Are you safe?" kind of call. She called and said, "I am not making this up. Jenna, did you take the orange juice?" I almost laughed. It was so absurd. I almost laughed. I said, "Yes, Mum. I took the orange juice." And she said, "That was for your father's breakfast." I just said, "Well, tell Dad I said sorry about the juice." And I hung up. It was the first time in my life I had ever hung up on my mother. Do you think she called back? She did not. Not that day, not the next day either. Aunt Carol's house was small, but it was peaceful. I didn't realize how much noise I'd been living in until it was finally gone. Not just the sound of Sharon's voice. It was the constant tension, the feeling of walking on eggshells, the way my shoulders were always up near my ears, braced for the next insult. Chloe noticed it too. That first morning in Akron, she woke up, looked around the quiet sunlit room and said, "Mama, it's quiet." And she smiled. A 4-year-old noticed the difference. That tells you everything you need to know. But here's the reality nobody warns you about when you make a dramatic exit. You still have to eat. You still have to survive. I had about $380 to my name, no job, and a child who needed things every single day. Aunt Carol told me, "Stay as long as you need. I don't want a penny from you." But I couldn't do that to her. She was on a fixed income, Social Security, and a tiny pension from Gerald's union job at the rubber factory. I wasn't about to become another person's burden. So, the very first Monday morning, I dropped Chloe off at Aunt Carol's neighbour's house, a woman named Miss Opal, who watched kids from her living room for practically nothing. And I went job hunting, not online, in person. I walked into every restaurant, every store, and every office within a 3-mile radius of Aunt Carol's house and asked if they were hiring. You know how many said yes? 1. A diner called Rosie's on Main Street. The owner, a woman named Marguerite, but everyone called her Marge, looked at my application. She looked at me. She said, "Can you start Thursday?" I cried in the parking lot. I sobbed, right there next to a dumpster, over a waitressing job. But it was mine. I earned it by showing up and asking. Nobody could take it from me or hold it over my head. Now, while all this was happening, something interesting was going on back in Palmer. I only know this because my dad started calling me. Secretly, of course. He'd call from the parking lot at work during his lunch break. Frank told me that Sharon had been telling everyone I ran off in the middle of the night, like some kind of criminal. She told my cousin Whitney that I stole groceries. She told her church friend Loretta that I abandoned them. She built this whole narrative where she was the victim. And honestly, I wasn't even surprised. That was classic Sharon. The woman could rewrite history faster than a Wikipedia editor. But here's what she didn't count on. Aunt Carol talks to people too. And Aunt Carol, God love her, was not the type to sit quietly while her niece got slandered. She called her other sister, my Aunt Pam, and told her the truth. Pam called my Uncle Morris. Morris told his wife, Jackie. And suddenly, the family grapevine that Sharon had been feeding lies to was getting a second version of the story. The real one. My dad told me, "Your mother's been in a mood." I said, "Dad, she's been in a mood since 1997. He laughed. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh in months. Now, here's where things take a turn I genuinely did not plan. About 3 weeks into my time at Aunt Carol's, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't open it. I figured it was spam or a scam. But something told me to look. It said, "Hey Jenna, it's Kyle. I heard you moved out of your parents' place. Hope you and the baby are good." The baby. He called Chloe the baby. She was 4 years old, and he called her the baby because he didn't even remember how old she was. My blood pressure went up so fast I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I showed the text to Aunt Carol. She put on her reading glasses, squinted at the phone and said, "Block that fool. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I had a feeling there was more coming, and I wanted to see where this was going. Are you wondering how he even knew I moved? Because I was too. It turns out, and this part made me want to scream, my mother told him. Sharon still had his mom Barb's number, and she called her to say I'd taken off. And did Kyle want to step up now that I was on my own? My own mother called my deadbeat ex's mother, and basically invited him back into my life without asking me. Can you imagine that? Actually, some of you probably can. Some of you probably have a Sharon in your life. And if you do, I am so, so sorry. Kyle texted again the next day. I've changed a lot. Got a good job now. Would love to meet her pro. Pearly. And the old Jenna, the one who was desperate and lonely and thought she needed somebody to survive, she flickered for just a second. Like a light bulb that's almost burned out, but not quite. I'll be honest with you. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted Chloe to have a dad at her school plays and soccer games. But then I looked at my daughter. She was sitting on Aunt Carol's floor, building a tower out of old Tupperware containers. She was happy and peaceful for the first time in her life. And I thought, no, not yet. Maybe not ever. But definitely not like this. Not because Sharon pulled the strings behind my back. I texted back one simple sentence. Chloe is fine. I'll let you know if and when I'm ready to talk. Then I muted the conversation. I didn't block him. I didn't engage. I just muted him. And honestly, that felt more powerful than anything I'd ever done. You have no idea how hard it is to not respond when someone who hurt you suddenly shows up acting brand new. But I was learning something new at Aunt Carol's house. I was learning that silence is an answer. And sometimes it's the loudest one. Meanwhile, the job at Rosie's was going better than I expected. Marge was tough, but she was fair. And the tips were decent for a small-town diner. I was working breakfast and lunch shifts. I could pick Chloe up from Miss Opal's by 3 o'clock. We spent our evenings helping Aunt Carol in her garden, pulling weeds and planting tomatoes. It was simple. It was boring, honestly. But boring felt like a vacation after the constant drama I'd been living through. I saved every single dollar I could. I opened a savings account. My first one ever. Isn't that sad? 26 years old, and I'd never had a savings account. I put in $40 that first week. I stared at the balance on my phone like it was a winning lottery ticket. Aunt Carol caught me smiling at my phone one day and said, "What? That boy texting you again?" I said, "No, Auntie, I'm looking at my money." She patted my arm and said, "Now that's a man you can trust." I still laugh about that. 5 weeks went by, then 6. And here's something nobody tells you about leaving a toxic situation. The person you left starts to unravel without you. Not because they miss you, because they miss what you did for them. My dad called me again. He said Sharon was struggling, not emotionally, logistically. See, what my mother never acknowledged was everything I actually did in that house. I cooked most of the dinners. I cleaned the bathrooms. I did the laundry. I kept track of the bills because Sharon couldn't figure out the online portal to save her life. I scheduled my dad's doctor appointments. I was basically running that household while being told I was a freeloader. Now, she had to do all of it herself, and she was drowning. The electric bill was late. The house was a mess. My dad was eating microwave dinners every night, which for a man with high blood pressure was not ideal. Sharon called me for the second time since I left. This time, her tone was different, not soft. Sharon doesn't do soft, but it was less sharp. She said, "Your father needs you to call the insurance company about his prescription." Not, "How are you?" Not, "I miss you." Just an errand, like I still worked there. I said, "Mum, you can call them yourself. The number is on the back of his card." There was this long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Fine," and hung up. And I felt nothing, which scared me a little. Because a month ago, that would have sent me into a spiral of guilt. But standing there in Aunt Carol's kitchen, with Chloe drawing at the table and the smell of coffee in the air, I just felt calm. Is that what growth feels like? I think that might be growth. But here's the thing. Sharon's birthday was coming up, September 14th. And every year, without fail, Sharon threw herself a big birthday dinner. She invited the whole family. And every year, guess who cooked? Guess who set the table, arranged the flowers, made the potato salad, and the baked mac and cheese, and the green bean casserole, and the sweet potato pie? Me. Every single year since I had moved back home, I did all of it. And Sharon took all the credit. She'd sit at the head of the table and say, "Oh, I just threw a little something together," while I was in the kitchen with burns on my arms from the oven. This year, she sent out the invitations like nothing had changed. My cousin Whitney called me and said, "Hey, your mom invited us for dinner on the 14th. You need me to bring anything?" And that's when it hit me. Sharon had invited everyone, but she hadn't called me to cook. She hadn't called me at all. She just assumed. She assumed that I would show up and do what I always did, because that's what I was to her. Not a daughter, a service. And something inside me, something calm and petty and completely at peace, said, "Let her assume." What I did next? Well, I'll tell you. But trust me when I say my mother's face when she realized what was happening. That image lives in my head, rent-free, and it will probably live in yours too. Because what she expected at that dinner and what she actually got were two very, very different things. And 16 relatives had a front row seat to the show, September 14th. I woke up at Aunt Carol's house, and my body already knew today was going to be something. You ever get that feeling? Like the universe already sent the memo, but your brain hasn't opened it yet. Whitney had been texting me all week. The day before she called me, whispering, "Jen, your mum just set 16 places at the dining room table." 16. She set one for me, still assuming. After everything, she was still completely certain I would just walk through that door and save her, just like I always did. And here's what's wild. I didn't organize some grand conspiracy. I didn't call everyone and tell them not to go. I just told people the truth when they asked. My cousin Derek called. "Hey, what time should we be there?" I said, "I don't know. I'm not going. I don't live there anymore." My Aunt Pam called. "What can I bring?" I said, "Probably a sandwich. I'm not cooking this year." The truth did the rest of the work all by itself, because apparently I wasn't the only one in the family that Sharon had pushed too far over the years. The whole family knew the dynamic, and not a single person picked up the phone to warn her. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, people started arriving at my parents' house. Uncle Morris and Aunt Jackie, Aunt Pam, Cousin Derek with his new girlfriend Shanice, Uncle Earl, who drove all the way from Toledo, Loretta and Miss Diane from her church group. 16 people, all packed into that little living room, and almost every single one of them knew what was coming, except Sharon. Whitney started texting me a play-by-play. 3:15 p.m. "Your mum just went to check on the kitchen. She just came back out. Her face. Jen. Her face." Because here's the thing. Sharon walked into that kitchen expecting what was always there. The smell of roasting chicken, trays of food warming in the oven, the mac and cheese bubbling, the sweet potato pie cooling on the counter. Instead, She found clean counters, a cold oven, and half a stick of butter in the butter dish. Because the person who always made everything was 40 minutes away in Akron, eating a turkey sandwich on her aunt's porch, she came back into the living room and told everyone, "Dinner's just running a little late." My Aunt Pam, who has zero chill, said, "How late? I skipped lunch for this." Then my phone rang. It was my mother. I watched her name flash on my screen. I let it ring 4 times before I answered. "Jenna, where are you?" Her voice was tight. I said calmly, "I'm at Auntie Carol's, where I live now. You were supposed to be here. It's my birthday." "You didn't invite me, Mom." I could hear the fake party chatter in the background. I shouldn't have to invite my own daughter to my birthday dinner. And right there, in that moment, is where